Nick curled up on a park bench and pulled at his jacket in an attempt to block the chilling wind. His body was cold and his stomach begged him for food. It had been a week since he had a real meal, and it did not help that every store was advertising Thanksgiving dinner. He would lay and stare at the advertisements for freshly roasted turkey and dressing with cranberry sauce, his mouth watering at the thought. It had been 6 years since his last Thanksgiving, but he could almost taste it. Nick had come so far from that living in a loving home and now in the streets were his residence. When he could not take the ache anymore, Nick found his way to the local soup kitchen. If he had ventured there sooner, he may have been in luck, but the wares had been cleaned out by the homeless of the city hours ago, and the doors had been closed. Nick's feet shuffled down the sidewalk towards a small diner. He hoped that he could find some scraps along the trash to settle his argument with his body was having on his mind. His fingers plucked through the rotting debris that most people would never consider consuming, but Nick was desperate. His search distracted him from everything else. A gentle tap on Nick's shoulder startled him, but most people would avoid the homeless like the plague. But at this moment, Nick had been approached. He turned to face a rather well-dressed man with a clean cut-out brown hair and a tailored suit. A young man's blue eyes seemed to twinkle a bit by his cheery smile as he extended his gloved hand outward toward the far less clean man across from him. Nick shakily shook the parent's hand and took it. They were more out of the reflex than anything. He had been raised to give him a firm handshake to anyone who offered. The idea felt sick when he pondered on it. "My name is Benjamin," the young man said, breaking the silence. "Nick," the older man's voice cracked. "Looks like you could use a home-cooked meal." Benjamin's teeth showed from behind an even bigger smile. Nick's eyes widened at the prospect of real food and his stomach growled in acceptance for the offer. Before he truly had thought of his choice, Nick was guided to a small car and asked to take a seat. As Nick placed himself within the vehicle, his body instantly felt warmer. The heating system poured warm air through the vents, and it was like a little piece of heaven Nick had forgotten even existed. Benjamin returned to the driver's seat and stared down at the road and away from the dark alley that Nick had called home for so long. Benjamin looked up to his rear-view mirror. His family was a tradition. We have each find someone in need and bring them home for Thanksgiving. This year you will be my guest. Nick nodded, half listening to the boy. That's nice. He watched out the window as the city began to disappear as the car traveled further into the more rural area just beyond it. After a 30-minute drive, the car turned right onto a path that was besieged by large oak trees. Even with all the leaves plucked from the branches, they seemed too obnoxious overhead. Nick stared up at the encroaching forest as the little car traveled deeper into them. Within a few seconds, the trees opened up again to reveal a large clearing in the midst. Standing precisely in the center of his clearing was a large Victorian mansion that had so many lights upon it. It lit the entire area around. It was like the festival of lights in the middle of nowhere. Nick's eyes scanned at the beauty of it all as the car came to a stop at the back end of the large circular driveway. He looked up at the expanse of the steps that led to an even larger set of wood doors that were so intricately carved Nick knew it must have been expensive. His gaze only broke when Benjamin opened the rear door. "Here we are," Benjamin said with another smile. "Home sweet home." Nick stepped out without a word, his mouth hanging agape at this spectacle. He was guided up the steps and through the entryway. He found himself standing on a gigantic foyer with highly polished marble floors. The light from the chandelier above reflected on the stark white surface like stars. A tall gentleman approached Nick and reached for the coat. Nick allowed it to be removed, and the man gently hung the tattered garment on the closet near the front door. When the man returned, they were ushered into a large dining hall to the left of the foyer. The table was a good 24 people, and each seat was filled except for two. Benjamin greeted his family and introduced his guests before showing Nick to his seat. "We are so glad you can join us this evening," Benjamin's mother stated with gentleness. "Yes, it was so good to share this holiday with people who truly know what it means to be thankful," the father replied with a much deeper tone. "Thank you." Nick's voice came shyly, not sure how to take in all this as he took his seat. For a very well-dressed man or woman, there is a person of lesser dress to their side. Benjamin had right. Each family member had plucked someone from the street to share their Thanksgiving dinner. He wondered how they even never heard of such thing. Certainly an act of generosity would get some sort of media attention. He silently reserved to the fact that he would have to make sure these people were commended for their caring act. Each of the homeless around him sat eagerly, waiting for a meal, and within 15 minutes of idle chatter, the first course was brought to the table. Plates of mashed potatoes with gravy, corn pudding, green bean casseroles, and they were staged about the table, as if they were served and neatly dug in quick. Nick was no exception. His body almost acted off his own will as the portions were shoved from the dinnerwares into his waiting mouth. A young girl in dirty clothes finished quickly and politely asked for more. The hosts were eager to share their wealth of food with her and anyone else who asked for more. The second course included a perfectly roast turkey, glazed ham, and dressing with cranberry sauce. Just the sight of it made Nick swell with excitement. The second plate went down as quickly as the first, and his stomach was so close to bursting. The cart was brought, adorned silver plating was reflected the light of the room around them. One by one, lids were raised to reveal several desserts of every imaginable variety. They had pecan pie, pumpkin pie, chocolate cake, red velvet cake, cookies, ice creams, puddings, and cobblers. Nick almost fainted at the thought of so much food in one place. His eyes rested on the steaming plate of apple pie. He licked his lips as a big slice was placed in front of him. His fork dug in and pulled free a hunk of spiced heaven that was almost as big as his mouth. He laid it delicately on his tongue, and Nick's eyes closed with joy. A tear even strolled down his wrinkled cheeks at the taste. All of them had filled themselves to the point of barely being able to move and could only hope this miracle could hold on them over until their next meal. As their plates were cleaned and the table cleared, the family had the host of them took all of their wine glasses. The father rose and smiled at their guests, and he toasted the family to their tradition. He gave a small speech about being so thankful for his family and friends, like the ones they shared this night with. He then turned to his wife and the rest of his family and asked what everyone in the table give thanks for one thing in their life that felt truly they blessed for having. Each of them took their turn, stating things like friends, family, jobs, security, and their mutual love. The father then even asked their guests to do the same and received more meager replies like warmth, food, clothes, shelter, and repeating statement of this meal. The father gave a hearty chuckle. "Well, yes, of course. Can we play the game now?" A small boy near the end of the table squeaked. "Soon. We have to explain first," the father replied. The boy plopped them in the mother's lap and pouted. "Okay. You see, my friends, we have one more family tradition." The father stepped to Benjamin and patted him on the shoulder. "It was Benjamin's idea when he was younger, and we have enjoyed it ever since. Now that you're full rested in your seats, we are going to play a game," Benjamin said while standing. "Yes, the person who brought you will give you the choice and you must make it," the mother said sweetly. Nick had always liked the party games and shifted to his seat a bit to see what would this one be. Benjamin rounded Nick's chair and leaned down with the same smile. The rest of the family stood by their guest. Nick listened intently as Benjamin whispered in his ear the choice he would have to make. Nick's smile quickly faded as he pushed himself away from the table. His body shook as he slowly rose from his chair and looked around the room at all the frightened faces that they had just learned the truth. The room almost started to spin like a notion of what he had been asked to do. All of them jumped as the doors around them were bolted shut and the younger guests began to cry for help. "Yes, that's right," said the father. "You must either kill yourself or everyone else. Those are the only two ways you're leaving this room." Benjamin placed a pocket knife in Nick's quivering hand. "Good luck." The family disappeared out of the remaining open door as the homeless inhabitants attempted to flee. They were shoved back by guards armed with submachine guns and instructed to remain in the room. Their only means of escape was slammed shut, and the sound of clanking metal signified their entrapment. Nick stared around the room at the half-dozen men. 4 women and 2 children could have not been older than 15. Each of them had been handed some sort of weapon, mainly pipes and chains. Nick seemed to be the only one with the welded knife, and he hoped that it would give him an advantage. He did not want to kill anyone, but he just wasn't ready to die either. The children scrambled to the corner of the room in an attempt to open one of the doors. One of the women followed and struggled with the doorknob. A large man across from Nick pulled on a length chain around the neck of the smaller man beside him. The small body lifted from the ground and with a sickening crack echoed in the dining hall a few moments later. The sound caused one of the women to scream. Nick backed up to the wall and watched as a brawl ensued among the remaining men. It was a flurry of punches and swinging weapons. Nick stared in awe at the brutality for a few moments before he left the broad side of a piece of wood come crashing into his knee. Nick fell to the floor, grasping at his aching joint. One of the men stood over him, ready to strike again, but Nick quickly shoved the knife through the Achilles tendon. The floor was painted red as the man squealed in agony. Nick grabbed 2x4 and used it to get back to his feet. The 2 men across the room were on top of the children in the corner, punching them repeatedly in the head. The woman that was with them had attempted to protect them, but her failure left her lying limp with a large gash in her forehead. The entire room had been stained with their misfortune at the sight, left Nick quivering in place. The entire ordeal may have only lasted a few minutes, but to Nick, it felt like hours. The 2 women had clawed and scraped at each other before being silenced by a lead pipe to the skull. One of the men attempted to take his own life by hanging from the light above the table, but his weight was too much for it. When the body came crashing down onto the large wooden table, his legs snapped, exposing his bone. His wails of agony drew the attention of another man, who was simply smothered by the screams of his hands. The man on the table struggled for a short time, but when his oxygen ran out, his body went limp on the table. Then there were only 2 remaining, and Nick broke from his trance and noticed the other man circle the table and approach him. Nick gripped the knife tightly in his hands, thinking of what he'd be forced to do to survive. The man picked up one of the lead pipes from the floor and began licking his lips like a predator preparing for a meal. Nick leaned on his good leg and kept the knife at his side. The man had not noticed the weapon yet, and that was what Nick hoped for. The man swung the pipe and Nick leaned out to dodge it, losing his balance and falling to the floor. His attacker took another swing and Nick used his good leg to drop a heel into the man's knee. Nick rolled onto his side as he did this, avoiding the falling pipe by inches. The man tumbled to the floor, attempting to grab Nick in his fall. Within seconds, the large man was on top of Nick, squeezing at his throat. Those struggled breaths. Nick fought to break free, but the man's weight was too much. When there was no other option, Nick shoved the knife upwards towards the man's throat. He forced the blade repeatedly in his hand as soon as it was soaked with blood. His attacker continued to grip Nick's throat for a few moments before finally falling on top of him. The warm liquid soaked Nick's clothes and the feeling was sickening. Salty specks of his remorse coated in his cheeks as he shoved the lifeless body off of him. He sat up, sobbing at his actions as the doors unlocked and the family returned. They all clapped enthusiastically for the winner of their grotesque contest. "So what are you thankful for?" Benjamin said as he approached his champion. Nick turned his eyes to the young man, seeing the smile had mistakenly for generosity earlier in the night. All of them had been used as pawns, and though they were of the streets, they did not deserve this. Nick used a piece of wood again to get to his feet, still holding the knife. He began hobbling towards the door as the family watched. He did not want to give him the satisfaction of an answer. He simply wanted to leave. He had almost reached the exit when the father stepped in front of him. "We can't just let you leave," the father said, holding up his hands to stop Nick. Nick's eyes grew wide. But you said," Benjamin slapped Nick on the back. "We said the only way you're getting out is if you killed yourself or everyone else in the room." The words hit Nick like a ton of bricks. He had been fooled into playing their little game with no chance of reward. His mind swam with the images of what transpired within that dining hall with the realization of how pointless it all was. He wished desperately he had never accepted the invitation, but it was too late for that. He had figured out how to get out of this place. He contemplated an escape, Benjamin round his side, and still brandishing that stupid smile. That's when the idea surfaced. He grabbed for Benjamin, sliding an arm around his throat and holding the knife up to it with one hand. Benjamin struggled while his family screamed for his release. "Now you're going to let me out of here, or Pretty Boy is joining the rest of them," Nick snarled as Benjamin fought to be free. Nick pressed the blade harder against the young man's skin, drawing a silver of blood. The family backed away as the two started their forward. Nick had to use the boy's weight for support, the pain still surging from his damaged knee. Any resistance from Benjamin only caused Nick to pull tighter. They slowly backed out onto the floor and towards Benjamin's car. When they reached in, Nick demanded the keys, which Benjamin hurriedly freed from his pocket. The family stood at the front steps as Nick leaned back against the car and shoved the young man towards the steps. As Benjamin fell to the ground, Nick shuffled his way into the driver's seat. Again he was bathed in warmth within the car, but he had no time to savor it. He shoved the car into gear and forced his foot down on the pedal. The father rushed to help his son up to his feet as the car disappeared through the trees and into the night. Nick had not stopped until he was far from the city, and sure that family would have reported the car stolen. When an hour had passed and he had not seen anyone following behind, he pulled to the side of the road and wept. The radio had been playing the entire time, but he had not noticed the word coming out. The announcer broke into music to wish everyone Happy Thanksgiving. Nick's eyes turned to the radio and the voice spoke again. "What are you thankful for this year?" Nick whispered into the night, "To be alive."
What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Ms. Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, stay pretty.